We're then going to West Dulwich, which many people think is a made-up name by a local estate agent. It's rather like the North Dulwich Triangle. But I'm sure the people who live in West Dulwich are quite by now very much used to it being called West Dulwich. So here we go then. I'm using a number of watercolors by a man called J.A. Poulter, who was born in about 1825, and I think he lived for about 80 years and did quite a lot of paintings around the Dulwich area. He lived at Nunhead. So this painting here shows cornfields, and I think these cornfields are at Homestore Farm, which is on the lower slopes of One Tree Hill. And I think it is looking north. So East Dulwich is that row of trees, the start of that row of trees on the left side of the picture you can see. Now, East Dulwich was made up of 4 small manors, and they were created in medieval times. And the eastern boundary was the River Peck. And if you go down to Peckham Rye and Peckham Park, certainly Peckham Park, you can see the depression in the ground of the old watercourse of the River Peck. It's now rather like the River Effra. It's been arched over. On the right, the picture on the right is a painting which shows the boundary of Dulwich itself to the west, which is another river boundary, the River Effra. Again, it has been arched over, and that runs roughly down Croxted Road. So that is the sort of area that we're looking to actually explore. Now, these 4 manors that made up East Dulwich passed through the various members of the family, sold, but by the middle of the 19th century, the owners of them were often in financial difficulty, and they wanted to dispose of the manors, and they were bought up as a speculation, largely by the insurance companies for development purposes. The painting on the right you see by Poulter is taken probably from the top of Inella Road, looking down towards Court Lane. And the barn that you can see is, we think, Court Farm Barn. So that beyond it will be Dulwich Park, and those hills in the background would in fact be Knight's Hill. So let's have a look at the key dates for East Dulwich. Well, the first thing that's going to affect Dulwich, East Dulwich itself, was the actual number of entrepreneurs and workers that were working for the expanding industry which was created in the wake of the Great Exhibition of 1851. And as you can see, 14,000 firms, that was the UK and worldwide, exhibited at the Great Exhibition. And 11 years later, that had expanded to 29,000 firms exhibiting in London. So there was a huge amount of interest and activity in the manufacturing field. If we come up to the other date we have, which is 1868 to 9, that coincides with the opening of what we now call East Dulwich Station, was called Champion Hill Station, and also with Peckham Rye Station. Now, there was this burst of economic activity. There was a boom period from about 1850 to 1875. But of course, the building activity came in the wake of that. The people didn't realize that the actual boom actually had ended. It was slowing down gradually over the next few years. And so the builders, and that may be just one person perhaps building a little row of 4 houses or 11 houses possibly, to one of the insurance companies was putting up a whole road. Actually, it is usually the small speculators that actually provided most of the houses that you see in East Dulwich. And so we see 5,000 houses were built in the period from 1878 to 1880. But following the downturn in the economy, as I said, which is after 1875, 1,000 remained unlet or unsold. There was a little improvement in the economic welfare of the country, which lasted until about 1898. And it was just a couple of years. And there again was a brief period of growth. Now, these are not very easy to spot, so I'm going to show you them in a larger size at the moment. But on the left, you can possibly make out there's a lot of blank area, and that is what East Dulwich looked like in 1868. And in 1894, on the right, you can see it is completely covered with roads. Let's go to a bigger picture of it. So here we have 1868 Dulwich, before the building took place. There are some houses on the top quarter of the screen in front of you. That is around the Goose Green area. I would like you to look particularly at that sort of wedge of cheese shape marked on the map, where it's just to the where it says East Dulwich. That's the piece I want you to look at, and just scan your eyes about an inch or two to the right, and you'll see two parallel sort of shapes, rectangles. Just keep your eye on those. Now we're going to look at it now. Now you can still see in that top left-hand corner of the map, you can see what has happened to that particular wedge. Now that wedge we saw, which is this one here, was occupied by a house called Norland House, and that was its garden, that shape. So when the developers started to building the houses, they stayed within those same lines, so that there was no any argument with neighbors. They could carry on with the development without having to try to buy out, or they would just wait and see. Go to the right a bit more, and you can now see what has replaced the two rectangles that we saw, which are those there, by a built-up road, Oakhurst Grove. Both sides of the road, Oakhurst Grove. If you look further down the map, you can see that the majority of the houses, of the roads, are straight, and the roads bisect at right angles. This meant that the developer, whoever they may be, could have narrow frontages. They could get more houses on the frontage, on the road, but they would go deeper at the rear. So if you live in East Dulwich, you're well aware that you have got a house, usually almost invariably terraced, some semi-detached, but nearly all terraced, with a long passage as you open the front door, leads to the rear, with the stairs on one side, and you've got the other rooms on the on the opposite side. So here we've got building in progress in East Dulwich in this period that we've just been speaking about. Now, the builders wanted to attract purchasers, and they wanted to do this by making the exterior of the house, in certain parts of the exterior of the house, particularly attractive and highly decorative. So they got inspiration from the sort of period we're looking at, which is about 1870, 1880 here. And so wildlife, birds, animals, flowers were all found a place on the bay window. So the bay window was one feature that was decorated, but also above the front door. So above the front door, you still retain, in the porch, you still retained some figurative carving or mouldings, really. So on the left, we've got a comical figures on the left-hand arch. On the arches themselves, we have what would possibly be a king and queen, or a mythological king and queen. Here's an even grander one with a great big crown for the king and the queen. An early row of houses which is Nutfield Road, which was built in about 1860, doesn't exhibit these features. So this is still a throwback, if you like, from the late Georgian period, where houses were flat-fronted, symmetrical, and so on. If we look at the ones which were built, certainly about 1880, here you can see the porches I was speaking about, the bay windows, and on the upper floor as well, you've got more decoration around the windows. If you go up to the very top, you can see that there are ridge tiles which are decorative. They don't always exist. They've been removed by subsequent owners, or they've suffered war damage. But as I say, if you were to walk down any road in East Dulwich and look at the top of the house rather than just the front door, look at the top, you'll see that styles change after a number of houses of the same pattern. So not all houses were terraced. The better off people that were looking to live in East Dulwich would have a more substantial house. So here we've got some semi-detached ones. This is in Freon Road, and it's conveniently given us a date. I think it's looks like 1882. Some unusual houses. The left-hand one is Oakhurst Grove. This is the house, the road I was explaining was built. It was actually on the grounds of a Georgian house, which was in East Dulwich Road, and had a long and narrow garden. And so that was occupied on these houses, which were built in this, I think they call that sort of Frenchified style, or chateau style, that sort of roof feature on the right-hand side there. With only about one exception, Oakhurst Grove has retained its same features. It's been a really remarkable survival for what might have happened as fashions change, because certainly in the post-war period, immediately after World War II, the new owners that came into East Dulwich were keen on stripping out, for example, any picture rails. They were keen on stripping out the fireplaces, any cornices, and they would board over the doors, which were usually quite decorative, with chipboard or hardboard. Subsequent owners, more recent, have found the attraction of Victorian houses and have restored them. And you'll know that many have the tessellated front path restored, which was another feature of Victorian houses in Dulwich. The one on the right there is in Barry Road. Barry Road had an enormous number of individual architect design houses. So these were for the wealthier merchants, larger businessmen that decided to move for various reasons we'll talk about in a moment to East Dulwich. At the same time, to accompany the houses and the development we have seen, they needed somewhere for shops. So Lordship Lane became the shopping thoroughfare for East Dulwich, and still is. And the chain stores, such as this one here, which is David Gregg and Company, you still see the signs surviving of David Gregg, usually occupied by another kind of business now, but David Gregg was one. There was the home and colonial stores. There was the Maypole dairies. Later on, of course, there was United Dairies. They would be Boots Chemists and W.H. Smiths. So those were the chain stores that one would find in any high street. And here we've got Lordship Lane again. We've also see here that we've had the arrival of banks. So on the left-hand side, there are two banks which recently have closed, of course, Midland and Barclays. And there we have Goose Green, completing our view of Lordship Lane's commercial side. West Dulwich suffered heavily from bomb damage in World War II. So we've skated forward to that period. And I would like you to look at that particular view. And then this one on the left, that's the same. It's up the hill a little bit, but that you can see in the middle of the picture on the left, that long building, which is the church. So we'll go back to see it. There's the church on the right, the picture there. And there it is on the left-hand side with a puff of smoke. And the puff of smoke was a V1 flying bomb that exploded near the junction with Townley Road. And here we have today, sorry, a prefabricated house, still lived in by an early owner. He's been there for a long time. And he's a keen gardener, as they always were in prefabs. This is what Lordship Lane looked like in the before the 1930s. I suspect this was probably, photograph was taken in the 1920s. You can see the United Dairies behind the tram on the right. In 1944, a V1 flying bomb exploded in more or less the center of that picture you see. And there it is. I believe there were 29 people killed from that flying bomb. You can still see the United Dairies which survived. And you can see the site of where the flying bomb exploded on a Saturday during shopping hours in 1944. Now, of course, with all this bomb damage, there was a huge number of displaced persons who were either put into, they weren't even put into prefabs, they were put into Nissen huts, or they were put into shared accommodation and so on. And there was urgency to alleviate this problem by building some council estates. So the London County Council took the initiative and built the number of blocks of houses, which are on Lordship Lane, and you can see Croxted Road, Sydenham Hill and Denmark Hill. Now, they went to a lot of trouble. Although they compulsorily purchased the ground, they took a lot of trouble to make sure that these flats were built on the periphery of Old Dulwich. They wanted to, the LCC were at pains to try to preserve as much of the old part of Dulwich as possible. They unfortunately ran out of room, and they had to build on the two large estates. We talked about one in the last talk about the Bessemer estate on Herne Hill, but the other big estate was, of course, at Kingswood, which is photographed on the left-hand side. That was also a very large estate. Now, the problem with houses that were being rapidly built in East Dulwich was that there was no room, or very little room left, for sites for schools. And so when schools were built, the Inner London the School Board for London built them high, 3-deckers as a rule. This was a 2-decker. They were more or less state of the art, and they were in a very small area, small site. So the one we were looking at, which was Goodrich Road, here they put very sensibly the art room in the top floor for the best light of Goodrich Road School. And this school is Freon Road School, where they had what was known as a housewifery centre. So the girls from a number of local schools went down on one afternoon or one morning a week for housewifery lessons. So they're either doing cooking, or they're doing household domestic work such as ironing or looking after children. And they all had to do PE, physical training, calisthenics, mixed classes for that. You'll see this is also in Goodrich Road. Very small space, you can see, very little space. Let's come forward, rather like we did with the World War II pictures. We've advanced, because the schools are still there, but we did have a crisis in around about the 1990s, inasmuch that the comprehensive schools in the Dulwich area were not functioning as people wished them to do. And so it was a Labour government in power. There was a Labour local government in power, and they were probably shamed into providing improved schools, because there was an enormous amount of objection by parents who wanted to know where their children were going when they left primary school, what was the options open to them. In the end, William Penn School, which had been a boys' secondary school, which opened in the 1940s in 80s Road, which had been rebuilt on a brand new site in Red Post Hill, moved there in 1958. But it didn't, for explain in a moment why it failed. It lasted for 30 years and more, but it failed really. It had all going for it. The LCC presented the new school with modernist sculpture, you can see there, Striding Man by Olive Redman. However, by the year 1998 or 1997, I think really the local and national governments were so embarrassed by the situation that William Penn School was closed, and a new school called the Charter School was opened, and parents were coming from as far away as Lewisham to try to get a place in this school. It started with 170 pupils, which were all year one. The following year, they added another group. So the year ones then became year two. So it gradually worked up. So within 6 years, it got up to sixth form level. And it was called the Charter School. And it's been a great success. Such a great success that more demand, parents wanted, there was a growing demand. There was insufficient secondary education available. And so when Dulwich Hospital was closed, there was, as you will remember, many plans were put forward for the site to become housing. But very, very sensibly, it became a new school called the New Charter School, or the Charter School East Dulwich. It's still being worked on now. The chateau block you can see on the left of the picture is being restored. Some of the scaffolding is coming off, and already some new buildings have been, no, they're all occupied, and it's going to be rather smart when it's finished. So that is really a look at East Dulwich. This painting by Poulter again shows that same hayfield, a cornfield, I'm pretty sure, looking this time, looking south up towards One Tree Hill, Honor Oak. But I wanted you to see this statistics here. This is the view, first of all, from Honor Oak, looking north again towards Canary Wharf. I'd like you to look at that table on the left. The population of London in 1891, 5.5 million. So it is no wonder that East Dulwich was part of that huge expansion. 3 more million almost, or 2.5 million by 1939. But look at 1990, slumps to 6.8. And the state of education was one of those factors. School rolls were slumping, people were moving out of London. We now see the population is 9.7 million. That's the estimate for this year. The key dates, what prompted that enormous expansion? Because it wasn't only Dulwich area, it's the whole of London. And we can see Docklands opens in started to become created in 1980. The right to buy legislation, 1980. The deregulation of the financial markets, the Big Bang, 1986. And then the dot-com bust and boom and bust, 1995 to 2000. Followed by the financial crash and then the pandemic. So we've got to explain why the population slumped from 1939 to 1990 and why it rose again in 2024. And I would suggest that a number of those factors play such a part, because many of the people that have now moved into East Dulwich either work in those financial markets, you can see, or they work in IT, or they're in individual, creating their own individual careers in perhaps occupations that wouldn't have been open to them of their parents or their grandparents if they were living in East Dulwich today. So we now move on to the Manor of Dulwich, first mentioned as Dulwich in 967, so it's got a long history. The oldest surviving document we have is 1333, and it was owned by just three people, really. One was the Priory of Bermondsey. From that period, you can see. In between that and the owning by Allain's College, there was Sir Francis Carlton, or the Carlton family actually had it for about 60 years. Rather less, actually. And then to today, it's been the property of Allain's College of God's Gift. So when Edward Allain built the chapel and his foundation, which he purchased in 1605, he built the chapel in 1616. And that was going to play a very important factor in the development of Dulwich, because it was the only church from miles, not miles around, it was the nearest church. The next church to it would be St. Giles Camberwell. So if you were living in with the West Dulwich we were talking about, or that area, or even Dulwich, you would have had to have gone 2 miles in pretty rough weather, possibly in winter on muddy roads. So the fact that you could have the stages of life of baptism, marriage, and your funerals would be very convenient that there was a church there then. During the Civil War, Dulwich played a minor role. It was quite interesting that Archbishop Laud, who was Archbishop of Canterbury at the time, came to Christ Chapel, as it's called, and ordered a stained glass window costing £11 to be made. and a bell. He ordered a bell to be made, and the bell has got on it it's written on it, Thomas Lord made me, and William Lord rather made me, and that's actually sort of engraved on the bell, and that bell is still there. It's among those ones you can see. Unfortunately, Lord tried to enforce uniformity of religion, fell out with the political powers of the time, and was executed for his troubles. So Dulwich then became part of the Commonwealth. We now go forward to about 1760, and this is a picture of print of Westminster Bridge. And the reason we've got that picture of Westminster Bridge is it was the key factor in opening up Dulwich and South London to roads from the city, and rather roads from London. The city already had one road, one only, which of course was London Bridge. So this was the second one, which was going to be from Westminster to the Lambeth side, and Blackfriars Bridge would follow a few years later. And this had the effect of improving roads, allowing people that had businesses in London to move to Dulwich for fresh air, a much more comfortable existence. And the kind of people that went there, a lot of them were academics, there were lawyers, and also there were people that owned substantial businesses in the city. As the years went by and we get to the period of industrialization, then of course we had many more manufacturers moving into Dulwich. And the opening of Dulwich Picture Gallery reinforced Dulwich's identity. It became another cultural point. Now, the milestone that you see there, I've got in inverted commas improved, because during the late Queen's Silver Jubilee, it was restored, unfortunately, and it looks like now a smart new piece of sandstone. But it's been re-engraved, and it's 5 miles to the Treasury Whitehall and 5 miles to the Standard Cornhill. That's how far Dulwich is exactly to London. On the back of it, it has engraved the words "Siste Viator, Rest Wayfarer." Now, this nucleus of middle-class people that moved into Dulwich from the Georgian period onwards and continued to move in Victorian period and still today, wanted some social affair that they might meet up for social occasions. So there was a club already, which was a once a month sort of gathering on a Monday. But then the idea of a formal club, which was going to be later at the Greyhound, it didn't start at the Greyhound, it started at the French Horn. This would be open to 50 members. And it started in 1772. It still exists today, but it did form a focal point for these new wealthier people that were moving into Dulwich. It has one of the last toll gates still, opened in about 1780, moved into its present position for safety reasons in 1993. And then, of course, the transformation of Dulwich after the 1860s. When the college, by the middle of the 19th century, was in some kind of disorder. It was being heavily criticised because the master and the warden and the teachers, if you like, would like to call them that, they really ran the college of God's gift just for the benefit of themselves and the 12 poor students, the 12 poor pupils, and of course the 6 poor men and the 6 poor women. But considering the value that Dulwich had built up, in ground rents and redevelopment rents. It was a very, very wealthy institution, and the upshot was that it was dissolved by Parliament in 1857 and a new institution founded. Now, almost immediately, because the requirement from the Act of Parliament was that the new Board of Governors should provide new schools. And so they had a cash flow situation, actually. But the sale of land to the railway companies around about 1863 provided the capital for the building of Dulwich College. And the chairman of the governors, who by this time was the third chairman since 1857, his name was the Reverend William Rogers, he said to his architect, who was Charles Barry Jr., we want a building which would be worthy of our resources and our expectations. So with that kind of brief, the architect, of course, decided to blow the entire £100,000, which was what the College of Gosgift received from the railway companies, and built the fantastic building that we know today, and which looks even better that it's since it's been was restored 3 or 4 years ago. Oh, 5 years ago now, isn't it? In 1882, however, there was a great deal of disquiet about the way the the College of Gosgift was operating, and there was a second Act of Parliament. There was a lot of consultation, and that is why a number of other beneficiaries were brought into the foundation, and these were the Central Foundation Schools, St Olave's, St Saviour's, as well as Allington the College, and also JAGS, as you can see. Those Central Foundation Schools, St Olave's and St Saviour's, of course, all derive from a connection with Edward Allen's life as where he was, the parish he was born, the parish where he had his theatre, and the parish where he was also church warden, and also lastly the parish where he built his college. But to ensure the success of the newly opened school, fantastic building as it was, in 1870, the parents were offered a guaranteed place for their sons. But before, if they took out a building lease for their new house in Dulwich, then automatically their sons would be guaranteed a place. And this was the advertisement placed by Charles Barry Jr. in the Builder magazine of that year. And of course, this policy determined the exclusive character of the area. There was another effect to stimulate the development of Dulwich, and that was known as the Crystal Palace effect. And so when the Great Exhibition closed and all of the glass and so on was removed and brought to Sydenham, the company built a number of new roads, and also the college itself followed suit by 1866, granting licenses for the building of Acacia Grove, Ildersey Grove for smaller houses. Rosendale Road was laid out by the railway company on land purchased from the Thurlow estate. So there we have first glimpse of West Dulwich. And of course, it was Alleyne Park and Alleyne Road. And these were grand houses that were being built. And so here we have Eastlands in Court Lane. That's its garden on the left. Beautiful house on the right. Stonehill's Court in College Road. Here from the rear, looking from the gardens. And there's an interior shot. And here's another couple of pictures of Stonehill's interior. I imagine we're probably in about early 1920s at this point, though. And there's the Grange, you can still see in Grange Lane, sorry, leading to the golf club. This, I think, is an interesting illustration of the development of Dulwich. This, I would think, is around about 1900. Not the houses, those are later, but some of them are about 1903, 1908, and it's Woodward Road. So we have a few modern ones there, modernish. And in the 1930s, we start to see more development in Dulwich with Jewkes Crescent. These two views here. And now we must turn a bit to West Dulwich. West Dulwich was a beautiful area, and it was built upon by Lord Thurlow, who had this extremely large estate, which stretched up towards Paxton, went over towards Tulse Hill, but it couldn't be sold. When the house was demolished in 1806 on Thurlow's death, the house couldn't. Some of the estate, it took a further 50 years to sell, and so that was why it didn't get developed very quickly. And here we've got a painting of Dulwich Common, looking up, I think, probably up towards Knight's Hill, and a couple of paintings here. So at the time, Dulwich Mill was on Dulwich Common. So Dulwich Common would occupy what you now know as the land between College Road and Croxted Road, and then going north up as far as Park Hall Road. Painting by another one by Poulter on the right. It reminds us that Dulwich Common in the Middle Ages had huge flocks of sheep. I mean, we have got records of on the court rolls of flocks of 600 sheep. So they were obviously being driven on probable sort of drove roads up to the market. In this part of Dulwich, West Dulwich, there was a long tradition of gypsy tribes. There was a gypsy house at the bottom of Gypsy Hill. There was this gypsy encampment, painting by David Cox, was in Croxted Road. It did in fact become a contentious issue by the beginning of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. I'm sorry. I mean, certainly they're mentioned in the 1600s by Pepys in his diary, who said his wife came down to Norwood, he says, on Dulwich, he means, I suppose, to consult the gypsies and have her fortune told. But by the beginning of the 19th century, there was a lot of reaction against gypsies, and eventually they were pushed out really by various local acts of parliament. Now here we've got another artist, C.T. Brown, looking at some pictures in Croxted Road. You can see the old house here. Look at the next one, you can see the same artist and probably the same house, but you can see the Crystal Palace at the very back of the picture. Come up much more recently, a little bit of history of West Dulwich was the IRA assassination of Sir Stuart Pringle, Commandant of the Royal Marines in 1981 in South Croxted Road. That's the remains of his car on the left. He had both of his legs blown off. He made a recovery, returned to duty, which was quite remarkable. We had just a little indication of life and death in Dulwich. So the Black Death caused various changes, including the end of sort of feudalism, really, and the leasing of Dulwich by Bermondsey Abbey for a period. Then there was the plague of 1664, and 1665, sorry, they are buried, 35 victims are buried in the burial ground in the village. Then we have a couple of years, 2 different years, where children are recorded or dying, that they actually went to the free school. You can see one is down to smallpox. We don't know what the other one was. And in 1947, we had an outbreak of poliomyelitis. Polio. And then, of course, we had the COVID. And I thought it'd be worth including a picture of the COVID test site in Gallery Road before we forget what it's like. The church played a very big part in the development of Dulwich. The first one to arrive was Goose Green in 1867. And the expansion of the church in Camberwell was due to, of course, the increase in the population. So St Clement's Church in Freon Road the funds were provided by Francis Peake, who said if the diocese built 9 churches, he will pay for the 10th. Sorry, go back to that one. It was damaged. It was war damaged in World War II and rebuilt. St Barnabas Church is later on, 1893, caught fire in 1992, rebuilt in 1996. All Saints had a fire in 2000, restored in 2006. And like many churches, All Saints had a huge Sunday school. Most of the churches, I won't say all, but I would think nearly all of the Church of England churches had some kind of gymnasium or boys' club or young men's club. And this is the one which is in Townley Road. It's now used by the Area Health Authority. But the building on the left was known as the Institute, and that was for club nights. And then they wanted a gymnasium on the right-hand side, and they had just acquired enough money from collections after World War I to build the extension by having the new gym when World War II broke out. And one of the organizations that was usual would be to have either a Boy Scouts or in this case a Boys Brigade company. This would be 1960. And now we look at leisure, quickly look at leisure. So what have all been evergreen popular things is dancing, cricket, and there you see P.G. Woodhouse, bottom picture there. On the left-hand side, the top, that is in Gallery Road. Horse riding, this is the sign that was in College Road on one of the greens, one of the verges. Don't ride your horse on the verge. But we've still got the riding school. That can show you where the verge is, of course, on the left. On the right, there is Delboy and Rodney from the Dulwich Riding School on Dulwich Common. In the Victorian times, croquet in the garden in Rethrow Street was popular. And then in 2018, we've got croquet at Dulwich College and croquet at what was the old college club, but that has now closed, and new pitches, if that's the right word, are being laid down at the Dulwich Sports Club in Burbage Road. Popular feature was tennis clubs. That was the opportunity for men and women to meet and for dating agencies came in. We've still got tennis now, which is in College Road and Gallery Road, rather. Cycling was always a big interest sport, and the fountain was always the meeting point. And you'll notice it's men and women, which is quite interesting as well. And the laying down here of the velodrome and the 1948 Olympic race with Reg Harris on the right-hand side there. He came second. And this was about 3 years ago when there was a race to try to break the Victorian penny farthing record. And I have to tell you, although it's a state-of-the-art bike, the Victorian record still survives. I put this little picture in just to show you Dulwich Wood Farm, which is where the gun sight allotment is. When it closed in the 1920s, it became a part of the Dulwich and Sydenham Golf Club. And that's the view from the top, from the golf club, from the golf clubhouse. Entertainment was and still is an important thing. So we used to have in Victorian times, the Benedict Musical Society concerts. And you can see there, they produce this excerpt from The Sorcerer. Today it hosts folk music, the same place. That is the place, the Castle Pub. Cinemas were really important, and we know that they started making films in Dulwich around 1906, but 1902, the Imperial Hall opened in Grove Vale for the performance of Shakespearean, for the Shakespearean Society. But by 1910, it had been converted into the Pavilion Cinema, and it was rebuilt in 1936. And this is how you, if you're old enough, may remember what the interior was like. Now, of course, that closed, with all the cinemas closed, but then the East Dulwich Picture House opened in what is in fact the church hall of St Anthony's Catholic Church, which is at Dulwich Library. And our last picture almost shows a nice tranquil scene. There was a lot of opposition to the lake. It was by a lot of people in Dulwich in about 1890. They thought it would, be a lot of hooliganism, but in fact that was not the case. And here it is, very much the same scene, updated boats as it was then. Well, thank you for joining me on this traipse through Dulwich, here and there, and I hope it's given you some food for thought of what it means that now we've got population up to 9.7 million, pretty crowded, and it's remarkable that we still have some open space for us to enjoy. I am doing another talk in February on the Fortune Theatre, and please join me if you're able. Thank you very much.